Greetings, fellow viewers of Get Back the Great. Today I bring you the first video I have done in many months. I must apologize for this, as I have been busy with exams and finding work. But now that I have more time on my hands, hopefully we can regain some regularity. And what better game to start that off with than, arguably, one of the best strategy games ever made, Total War Shogun 2. Alright, sorry, I don't know how much longer I could keep that up, but I just thought I'd give you guys a bit of a less than usual intro to the video, because it has been a really long time since I've done a video on this channel, and I just told you guys why. I mean, it's not a great excuse, to be fair, but at the same time, I have been very busy over the last few months, but hopefully, now that I've got a lot more free time on my hands, I should be able to do a lot more blogs on my blog, and a lot more videos on this channel. And I think what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and do 1 or 2 episodes of a Let's Play each week, along with 1 episode of, like, just whatever, like, might be, like, videos sent in by subscribers, or might just be a World of Tanks video, or could just be, you know, a little sort of podcast sort of thingy. But I thought the main thing I'll be doing is at least a couple of episodes of a Let's Play each week. And I thought a good way to start off with would be something meaty, something you guys could really get into watching. Maybe something a bit longer you guys could put on in the background while you're doing your work or something. So I thought what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Let's Plays of the Fall of the Samurai historical battles of Shogun 2 Total War. Now, these battles follow the Japanese Civil War of 1868 to 1869, and while I am a history student, one of the few areas of history that I don't really know that much about in general is the Japanese Civil War of 1868 to 1869. I mean, more people know really about the Samurai Rebellion that happened about 10 to 15 years at least later, but not really many people talk about this. It's quite a widely known topic in Japan itself, I believe, but at the same time I really don't know much about it myself. Basically how it happened is that the Shogun who ruled Japan at the time was making some rather foolish policies, such as refusing trade with all foreign countries, and eventually a American blockade pushed through the Japanese ports and opened up trade with the outside world, and this essentially humiliated the Shogun and led to the creation of a movement against his rule, which had lasted for the last 250 years or so, which then inspired a civil war revolt led by the generals of the emperor. So it was essentially a war between imperialists and government loyalists, if you will. So it's quite a hefty topic to study, and I must admit I don't know the biggest amount about this war out of other wars that happened in the 19th century. So if my knowledge is a bit frosty, a bit rusty in this whenever I'm playing this game, just keep that in mind. I do apologise. But first of all, we're going to do a Let's Play of the Battle of Toba-Fushimi, which happened on January the 27th, 1868, and this was the first battle of the Japanese Civil War. Following intrigues by the Satsuma and Chosu domains, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, the shogun, sent his army to Kyoto, which was the old capital, to report to the emperor and remove radicals from the imperial court. As his army approached Kyoto, a Satsuma force blocked the way. Armed with western artillery, the Satsuma and their Chusu allies intended to keep the shogun's army out of the city. After 2 days of bloody fighting, the shogun's army retreated to Osaka Castle. So this was quite an important political occasion, and it really carried a lot of weight for the future of Japan, not simply, in terms of how this war would carry out, but how much Japanese society and politics would be impacted by this. So this is a big occasion, and it's probably the easiest out of these historical battles, to be fair. So we're just going to jump straight into it. I think we'll do hard, because very hard is quite tricky. And yeah, let's just get on into this. If you don't know Shogun 2 very well, it operates on the same basis as the rest of the Total War series. Like, you have big, large-scale units clashing across large, open expanses of land, whereas in, like, say, something like, I don't know, StarCraft 2, Command and Conquer, Company of Heroes, you might be fighting across sort of enclosed spaces and valleys, towns, things like that, where you tactical deployment is much more personal, intense, and visceral, and key to local victories. Whereas here it's a lot more large scale, so you know, a lot more depends on your big offensives and your use of mass assault and large scale tactics. So this is kind of a strategy game for a different breed of strategy game player, I would suppose. I'm not going to say it's perfect or for everyone, really. I really like it myself. I think it's probably my second favourite strategy game ever made, right after Company of Heroes and just in front of Command and Conquer 3, Kane's Wrath. It's a great game. It's a bit flawed in a couple of areas, like the story isn't strongly told, but at the same time I don't think the story is ever really that strong in strategy games, except for maybe Command and Conquer 3 or Company of Heroes or StarCraft 2. You know, games like that do have good stories, but at the same time, it's not really the common precedence, so to speak, that strategy games do have strong stories.
After the Battle of Sekigahara, the Tokugawa shogunate dominated Japan.
If you don't know about the Battle of Sekigahara, it was a massive samurai battle in 1615, I believe.
The Tozama daimyo and their descendants were forever excluded from positions of power. Instead, they looked abroad, prospering through commerce with China and the West.
I'll just leave this running so you guys can get a bit of context to what the whole occasion is for what the Battle of Toba-Fushimi was about.
Closed the ports of Japan, banning all foreign trade. For over 200 years, Japan remained isolated. With no enemies, the power of the shogunate waned.
Probably not a good decision in hindsight.
In 1853, a fleet of American warships forced open the ports of Japan. The shogun was humiliated.
Bit rude, but fair play to them.
Revolutionary ideas and machines from the West began to flood the country. When the shogun's position weakened, his enemies began to circle. The Tozama daimyo, even the emperor himself, see the chance to bring down the Tokugawa and rule Japan.
So you could say there was a lot of political intrigue behind the imperial movement towards taking down the kind of corrupt shogunate, but at the same time, fair play to them. You've got to take opportunities as they come in life. Sorry, the game is going a little bit laggy. I have got fraps running in the background, I am afraid. I have got the graphics turned down a little bit because the graphics for this game are quite high grade, and if I had them at full, the game would chug with fraps going on in the background really badly. Still, for a strategy game of this scale, I think it looks really good. It's a nice looking game. And Total War games aren't usually really great looking. I mean, Medieval 2, which was released a few years before this, was really nice looking. That was released in 2007. This was released in 2011. I think probably the other great entry into this series is probably the first Rome Total War, which was released about 2002, 2003. That was a really good game. Although it was very clunky, it had a lot of problems. what you have to do in this historical battle is you play as the Imperials, and you have to block several escape routes that the Shogunate army is going down, because they have a letter about Imperial influence in the Imperial court, and you basically have to stop that letter from getting to the Emperor, so you have to block off all the different routes of escape. So, and this covers a couple of days actually, this historical battle. So the first day is about defending, the second day is about attacking as you overwhelm the remains of the Shogunate army. So there's a lot of variation in this one. This is probably my favourite historical battle the Total War series has ever done. Okay, so... Okay, so I'm going to get these 3 line infantry units to move hard and fast over there. This artillery unit to move over here. Now, this bit here is probably where things get a little bit hectic, because this little village here is actually quite tricky to defend, and you will be hard pressed to defend it, because this is probably where you're outnumbered the most. I mean, this first day of battle, you are heavily outnumbered. There is no two ways to talk about it. You will get heavily attacked in the first day of this battle, and you will lose probably a good chunk of your army, come to think of it, because there's not really much one could do to assure victory when faced with odds of at least 2-1 on the first day. I mean, the only thing ensuring your victory on this first day of battle essentially is the amount of artillery and modern weapons you have, which is quite a lot. You know, for the Shogunate army wasn't completely, you know, unarmed. They had a lot of guns and a lot of swords, and they were battle hardened to some degree. Although, you know, considering that Japan hadn't faced a proper scrap in at least a couple of centuries, meant that, you know, they weren't that battle hardened or, you know, seasoned. So, you know, the better trained and considerably better equipped Imperial army had somewhat of a better chance, you could say. So that's why this is probably the easiest of the historical battles in this entire game. Going back to the I think you guys remember the when I and the game were just talking about the Battle of Sekigahara a moment ago. You can actually do the historical battle for that in the original version of the game, because this historical battle is off of the Fall of the Samurai expansion pack. The what's it called? The Fall of the Samurai expansion pack covers generally the years from early 1860s to late 1890s or so, during this great period of social upheaval in Japan. And what is that team doing? No, I did not ask you to. Did I ask you to go in column formation, you fuck nuts? But anyway, whereas, you know, the original version of the game covered the you know, the latter half of the early modern period, so like say 1600 to 1750 or so, and because of that, the introduction of late period military technology into Japan didn't really happen until, as the game said, just after the Americans opened the blockade of the Japanese ports. So in the original version of the game, you're mainly fighting with like sword units and stuff, but in this expansion pack, you're fighting with like musket units, like you can see there. They have a considerably greater effect on the battlefield than common melee units, except when it's in a close quarter fracas. And it's kind of funny, really. I think I do prefer the original version of the game a bit more to this, but at the same time, if you guys remember, the year before they released Shogun 2, they released Napoleon Total War, and that was a decent game to some degree, but at the same time it had a lot of problems, and it too mainly focused on like musket-armed units rather than, you know, hardcore melee combat. And I feel like Shogun 2 Total War Fall of the Samurai was what game Napoleon should have been, because this is an expansion pack. It's not a complete game in of itself, but at the same time it's got enough sort of finesse and sort of you know, style of its own, and enough sort of polish to be essentially its own game, really. I mean, it's a good game anyway. I mean, the original was good, and this is no different, really, this expansion pack, but you know, you get the general gist of what I'm saying, really. I would recommend, actually, in this historical battle, to use your artillery primarily to target the enemy melee infantry, particularly their Shogun regiments, which are armed with swords, because they will be very, very dangerous once they get into close quarter combat with you, and you only have a couple of close quarter combat infantry units, so you'll be hard pressed once the enemy get up close and personal. There is quite an in-depth level of strategy required for each of these historical battles, as there is for just, you know, playing the game in general, which is why I do quite like playing it a lot. You know, it's funny, you know, a lot of the times in battles, you just want the quickest way to victory, which is, I think, the best way to play a strategy game, but at the same time I think you should also combine that with making a strategy game that forces you to be tactical, forces you to really think and use your head, and that's what I think Shogun 2 does better than most strategy games. It's a really good game for really forcing you to think outside the box. I'm just going to redirect the artillery here. I wonder where that Shogatai unit is going. Oh, there they are. They're being pelted by my artillery. Oh, that katana unit of infantry is trying to cut me off from behind. I think I'll go and intercept them with my cavalry. It's the funny thing is, actually, usually in the Total War games, particularly Shogun 2, I don't really usually use cavalry all that much. Except the one I do use it a lot in is Rome, the original Rome. Because in that, cavalry is a tremendously powerful striking arm. And in that, cavalry can genuinely be the difference between winning or losing a battle. You know, it's nothing to be scoffed at if your enemy's army is mostly made up of cavalry in that game. But in Shogun 2, cavalry is a lot more fragile. You know, it's not this invincible force of destruction that it is in Rome. Although the thing is, in Rome 1, what does make cavalry kind of like not necessarily a sort of world-beating force is the fact that there is a lot of stuff in the game that can actually counteract it quite well. Like, there's a lot of spear units and types of heavy infantry that can really put the hurts on your cavalry if used correctly. In this game, a lot more units can take out cavalry than in, say, the original Rome, but at the same time, it's a lot more of a fluid game than the original Rome Total War was, so that's a lot more up for debate. In this, you've got to use the shock impact of the charge of the cavalry to your effect, because it's arguably slightly less effective than it was in, say, the original Rome, like I said, where cavalry literally was a world-beating force. Though still, probably the biggest threat to any army in this game is probably artillery. Artillery in Shogun 2 is immensely powerful, and it does have limited ammo, but at the same time, you know, do you want to be sort of arguing about that when, you know, you've got a swarm of sword infantry bearing down on you, and all you've got is a line of infantry holding your flank, and you need to sort of thin out the enemy ranks before they get close to you? No, you want to sort of break them up and sort of smash them apart with long-range firepower. That's why I do like artillery in this game, even though it is limited ammo like it was in Medieval 2. Just look at the carnage. Like, with right positioning, in this game, standard rifle units can just do ridiculous amounts of damage. Look how many of the enemy I've just mown down. You see this one regiment of Kietai infantry? Look how many guys they've just mown down as they've approached this regiment. Like, this position is pretty tough to crack. The cavalry have finally broken that force of sword infantry. They've taken a beating, but I don't really care about cavalry in this game. It's kind of cruel to say that, I guess, but at the same time, it's like not really my favourite kind of unit to use, in all honesty, in all of Shogun 2. I'm just going to thin out the ranks of those Shogatai there, because they're arguably the bigger threat to me right now than the enemy Levy infantry. Levy infantry are basically the stock sort of unit for every army in this game as well. They're just standard sort of conscripts with rifle muskets, and they're not very good at all, but at the same time they're good usually for plunging up holes in your defence or manning garrisons and stuff like that. They're really not very good in general. So, you know, it's kind of really hard to make a defence for them. Like you see there, like I had a regiment there facing off against the cavalry, and they just got mulched, even though they had spearman support. Like, levies in this game are given more of an emphasis of being just cannon fodder and just sort of, you know, disusable sort of disposable rather infantry used for just plugging up gaps and such, because they are useless most of the time. Sometimes they can rally like these guys are doing here and actually do pretty well, but at the same time, you know, I wouldn't bet your victories on in them. They're not that good overall. They're just good for a sort of last ditch stop effort for plugging up gaps. Artillery to shoot on the enemy spear infantry. I think what they're trying to do, by the looks of it, is force their last section of infantry across the bridge here and attack my two infantry regiments over there. But in the meantime, I've just got to hound them with artillery in order to thin out their ranks. And here comes the stupid moment. They always send their cavalry, their last couple of regiments of cavalry, over this bit, even though I always have infantry waiting in line to, you know, mow them down with massed musket fire. I mean, it's just got to think, what are they thinking? Like, this is not smart. This is not a smart idea. Charging about 60 guys into the face of like almost 200. In fact, no, more than 200. In fact, yeah, almost 600 musket rifles. That just will not end well. They managed to get up close and personal, but they're still wavering. They're still cracking under the pressure of being attacked by hundreds, you know, of musket rifles. It seems like they are trying to make a way across the crossing of doom, so to speak. Because goddamn, this is actually proving to be quite a costly battle. I've lost. Actually, no, I haven't lost that many. I've lost the units that have suffered the most casualties are my conscripts and my cavalry, but at the same time, they're kind of expendable for me in this particular situation in as what I'm trying to achieve doesn't really require much, you know, input from those units, so I just mainly use them in this situation to just plug up the gaps. And that's kind of what you got to do in this game. You've got to sort of figure out what kind of units you want to use, because everyone has their own different strategy. Like in this particular Total War, my strategy is usually centered around siege warfare, and hence the reason why I use a lot of melee infantry and artillery, backed up in the field by standard line infantry armed with musket rifles, which I use to defeat the bulk armies of the enemy, leaving my melee infantry and artillery and such to take over towns and fortresses and stuff like that. It usually works pretty well, although, like I said, you know, everyone has their own different strategy. Just play it a couple of times, play a couple of random battles or a couple of single-player campaigns, just to see what your gist is, what you fit in most practically with doing. I mean, you know, everyone's different, really. Seems like they're trying to forge a way across this crossing. I've got to get my guys into line formation, I think. Try and bring my melee infantry over as reinforcement, because I have a feeling this crossing is going to be hard pressed. That's for sure. Probably stop my artillery firing just in order to conserve ammo. Actually, that's another thing I should also mention that I really like on Shogun 2, is you can direct fire with your artillery in like first person mode. Well, it's more like third person, but it kind of feels like first person because it is actually very well done. And it's actually quite an innovative feature of the game so far as the series goes. I don't know so much about strategy games in general, because not many other strategy games puts such a great emphasis on artillery as this game does. But still, I would say it's definitely a welcome change of pace as to how artillery operates within the series, at least. Got to retreat back these infantry blokes. Fall them back, and then as the enemy are getting strung out pursuing them, get the katana infantry to mow them down. I keep not paying attention to particular flanks of my army though, and that's why I keep suffering heavy casualties with individual regiments. I mean, overall I haven't really suffered all that much, but it's just a couple of individual regiments have just taken a pretty heavy battering, as you can see. But still, just look at that crossing, that is just swarmed with bodies. Man, that was intense. Okay, so it's the next day. It's a new day in the dying of the Japanese Civil War, I guess. Good old Emperor, giving us a bit of a hand in times of need. Okay, this is the weird thing, like, this section is a lot harder, and I usually have a lot more trouble with this section than the other one, but it kind of depends on how the enemy AI behaves, because pardon me. Because the enemy AI can be really weirdly inconsistent sometimes. You know, sometimes they will be really aggressive, sometimes they won't. Usually in the other historical battles, I feel like they are pretty consistent in how they behave. But at the same time, in this one, not so much. It's just really weird. Still, the best thing to do, first of all, is to move the mass of your army up as quickly and efficiently as you can, in order to get as far forwards and get as good a position as you can. Because the best thing to do, I find, is to get your infantry into a good position where they can cover all angles, and then set up your artillery in order to bombard the enemy's reserves, particularly their melee units, so you can, you know, whittle them down and hopefully crush them in a frontal assault at some point. Although usually that will provoke the AI at this point to attack you again, and then, you know, considering the fact that they've lost most of their forces, you'll end up just mowing them down as they attack. Although it's a bit harder in this section because you are most likely going to be occupying a less advantageous position. So it's kind of hard to say really what's going to be more successful in regards to how you approach this section of the historical battle. It's really not that hard overall. This is probably the easiest historical battle, like I said, in the entire game. But even still, it's worth having a different set of strategies for each time you tackle it, because I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard to say what works for definite on this game and what doesn't. It's such a fluid game with such, you know, variety in the battle mechanics and how each unit and army operates, that, you know, everyone operates very differently when playing a historical battle or playing something like just a standard battle, really. I'm going to move my strongest, I'm going to move my strongest and most up to strength line infantry units up first in order to create the widest covering lane of fire. And move my artillery up a bit further. Then any sort of infantry units that are sort of heavily depleted, I'll put towards the flank that is the weakest. So I'll put them over here where my flank is most likely going to be weaker. Then I'll move up my the rest of my melee infantry to a point just behind the centre of the main force of infantry, just in case I need to plug up a breakthrough by the enemy forces. I'll also pardon me. I'll also keep my general on horseback, because you can dismount your general in this game. I'm going to keep him on horseback just in case, so I can move him around at whim to cover different parts of the battlefield, and, you know, just in case my troops need morale boosts at different points. And same with my standard cavalry as well. They probably will need some help at some point or another. But for now, I'll just keep my general on horseback. Probably just be a lot more practical in every sense, really. The enemy are trying to break my flanks with their cavalry, which is a fair play from them. But at the same time, they should have just massed them at one point and just sort of charged me en masse at one particular point with all of their cavalry. Otherwise, you're not going to sort of really do anything. And that I feel is probably the best way to use cavalry in Shogun 2, in particular, is to mass it as this one giant striking arm, and just sort of use it to sort of clobber the enemy into submission with the repeated shock of the charge of your cavalry, constituting the main sort of, constituting the main sort of striking arm of your army. I mean, I usually use melee infantry for that purpose, but even still, the strength of having a lot of cavalry massed up in a large formation is that it usually creates this sense of fear in the enemy units as to how much shock and force the cavalry that you're using are creating. So I'm going to move my reserves up to cover that flank, just in case. And see, what I'm doing is I'm trying to create interlocking fields of fire by moving my troops to different angles, covering the enemy's approach. And I'll get my my melee infantry to match their deadliest melee infantry in order to reduce casualties, because standard line infantry on this game, they don't really have good melee defense, and that's usually a bit of a sore bummer right there, so to speak. Even still, it seems like I'm managing to hold them off pretty well. They're attacking with spirit, particularly with their melee units, but at the same time, that's the benefit of having more musket infantry, is you can bring more fire to bear on their advancing units. Get my general to rally the troops, because it seems like they're taking a battering. It seems particularly in the centre where the general is that it's where they're breaking. And that usually doesn't matter much to me, because usually my strategy revolves around, creating an army filled to the brim on the wings with strong troops, whereas in the centre it's more so filled with, weak conscripts and infantry like that. So I feel like, for me at least, that's the best way to go, because then the enemy are drawn into the centre of your army and they will be exposed to considerably stronger attacks on the flanks, where they will probably be weaker. Of course, it depends on what strategy your enemy uses, of course, but even still. I think a lot of my guys are wavering, but at the same time, they're taking a hammering. Ah, they've been broken, finally! Finally, massed use of artillery and concentrating your strength on your flanks won me out. Whew! Man, that was intense. The war has only just begun. But goddamn, that was intense, right? So I think we'll leave it there. Next time I will do the next one of these Fall of the Samurai historical battles, which is, I believe, the Battle of Osaka Castle. So yeah, I think I'm going to try and do it like this. I'm going to try and do at least 2 episodes of Let's Plays a week, and then an episode of something like a review of a tank on World of Tanks, or a review of a game I've only just started playing, or something like that, or a countdown even. And because I think that's probably the best model for me to do right now, in order to keep up a consistent level of production and entertainment for you guys, so that I'm not as inconsistent as I've always been, really. In fact, actually doing this has just made me think. I did do a Total War playthrough once of the Brutii campaign on Rome Total War 1. Pardon me. And I ended up not finishing that because it kind of sort of got ground down and just you know, it just gradually became less and less enthralling as it went on. I kind of just lost steam towards the end, and also my save file got corrupted for that particular game, so that was kind of gutting. Okay, so deployed. The troops I deployed numbered about 3,380. I lost just over a third of them, which is quite a lot, but at the same time, I managed to take out almost 5,100 of the enemy. Like, I managed to take out well over 2/3 of their force, so I think that's a pretty good trade-off, especially considering the fact that I was outnumbered more than 2.5 to 1. So overall, a pretty damn good victory, I'd say.
Any pretense of diplomacy is now no more than clouds on the wind. Civil war engulfs the land.
Well, naturally.
The forces loyal to the Tokugawa shogunate have been pushed back to Osaka Castle. The Satsuma and Chushu clans, led by Saigo Takaba, march on Osaka, ready for battle.
I'm kind of amazed that the Emperor received word of the Imperial victory overnight and sent troops to them overnight, but at the same time this was quite a quick-paced war, so it kind of makes sense to a certain degree. But anyway, I think we'll leave it there. You guys know the score from this point on, and I hope you've enjoyed this video as much as I have enjoyed playing and making it. And of course, until next time, I'm Getbag the Great, and I'll see you guys on the battlefield.